In the golden haze of early morning, when the sun's first light painted the horizon in soft strokes of amber and rose, a solitary figure walked through the rocky wilderness of the Sinai. His face bore the weight of prophecy, his steps a rhythm of purpose. This was Musa, the messenger of Allah, his heart forever tethered to divine command, his soul shaped by trials that would crumble lesser men. The desert air was still. Silence reigned, broken only by the faint rustle of wind against dry shrubs. As Hazrat Musa, walked with the humility of a servant and the authority of a prophet, he heard a voice, not thunderous like the one that once spoke to him from the burning bush, but frail, broken, and human. "Ya Musa, O Prophet of Allah." He turned swiftly. There, by the edge of a rock, shaded under the sparse leaves of a lone tree, sat an old woman. Her back was bent with age, her clothes worn thin by the years. Her hands trembled as she tried to lift a clay pot of water, which had spilled halfway beside her. Her eyes, clouded but kind, held the depth of countless stories, and yet, in that moment, they spoke only one thing: desperation. Hazrat Musa, approached her at once, his heart moved by the sight. He gently helped her sit upright and lifted the pot for her. "O Amma," he said with reverence, "why are you alone in this desolate place?" She looked up at him, a smile tugging at her lips despite the sorrow etched into her features. "I am old, son. The world has moved on. My children, they live in the city. They used to visit. But now, life is fast and people forget." Hazrat Musa, sat beside her, his noble face shadowed by sorrow. "Have they forgotten you, Amma?" She did not speak. Instead, her eyes welled up, and from those aged sockets, tears fell, soft, silent witnesses to the truth she had long carried. Then she whispered, "No one forgets truly, they just get too busy remembering themselves." There was a pause. The wind carried a warmth, a hush of reverence as if the desert itself listened. Hazrat Musa, humbled by her words, asked softly, "Do you need anything, Amma? Food, water, shelter?" She shook her head. "Only du'as, my son. Du'as that reach Allah's throne. Du'as that carry a mother's loneliness to the skies." At that, Hazrat Musa, was overcome with emotion. He closed his eyes, and with a heart illuminated by mercy, he said, "Amma, I speak to Allah. Tell me, do you have any wish, any longing that I may ask of him for you?" Her face lit up, not with joy, but with something deeper, a glimmer of forgotten hope. "There is one thing," she said slowly. "A long time ago, I gave a piece of bread to a starving orphan. I never saw him again. But I have always wondered, did Allah see that moment? Did he write it down?" Hazrat Musa, smiled gently, tears now forming in his own eyes. "By Allah, Amma, not a leaf falls without his knowledge. Not a morsel is shared without it being written by the angels." She clutched her chest as though his words had breathed new life into her bones. "Then ask him, O Nabi of Allah, if he still remembers me." Hazrat Musa, stood, his gaze lifted toward the heavens, and in that sacred moment, he felt the veil between the worlds grow thin. He whispered, "Ya Allah, your servant, this old woman, asks if you still remember her." The reply came, not as thunder or lightning, but as peace, profound and overwhelming, descending upon Hazrat Musa, like divine perfume in the wind. And then he heard the words, though no tongue uttered them. "Tell my servant. I remembered her before she was born. I remember her every sigh, every tear, every crumb given in my name. I am nearer to her than her own breath." When Hazrat Musa, repeated this to the old woman, she wept, not from pain, but from a joy so complete it seemed her heart could no longer bear it. She raised her hands in trembling gratitude, her voice cracking as she whispered, "Then I have all I ever needed." But even as Hazrat Musa, prepared to move on, he sensed there was more. The woman, though filled with peace, suddenly turned her gaze to the distant hills and said, "Ya Musa, I had a son. He left when he was young, said he would return after earning a living. It has been 20 years. I do not even know if he lives. Hazrat Musa, A.S., paused, the air around them now heavy with mystery. Would you like me to pray for his return? She nodded, and so he did. The Prophet's heart opened like a gate of mercy, and he beseeched his Lord. And far beyond the hills, in a town bustling with traders and the scent of spices, a man awoke with tears on his cheeks and a sudden, urgent longing to see his mother again. He rose from his bed as though summoned by something unseen, something deeper than memory, like a voice had called him, not to his ears but to his soul. His name was Harun. His beard was now thick with age, his hands calloused from years of labor, but behind his stern gaze lived the soft flicker of a boy who had once kissed his mother's forehead beneath the shade of the same tree Hazrat Musa, A.S., now stood under. Without knowing why, Harun packed a small bundle of food, left his shop to the care of a servant, and began the long journey back toward the wilderness of his youth. Every step he took seemed lighter than the one before it, though his limbs ached. Something inside him had shifted in the night, as though an invisible thread had tugged gently at his heart. Meanwhile, in the desert, Hazrat Musa, A.S., helped the old woman back to her humble shelter, no more than a structure of dried leaves and stones, but clean and dignified, like her soul. He laid a cloth and offered her dates and barley bread from his own satchel. She refused at first, but when he insisted, she accepted with a trembling smile, breaking the bread with reverence. As she ate, she looked at Hazrat Musa, A.S., and said, "Son, do prophets ever feel alone?" He was quiet for a moment before replying, "More than most, Amma. The burden of guiding hearts can weigh heavily on one's own." She nodded slowly. "Then we are not so different, you and I." Hazrat Musa, A.S., chuckled softly, surprised by her wisdom. "No, Amma. In the eyes of Allah, it is the sincerity of hearts, not the status of titles, that matters." Time passed. The wind shifted. The sun now stood overhead, casting sharp shadows across the rocks. As they sat together, a flock of birds soared across the sky, their wings slicing the blue dome above like silent prayers in motion. The old woman closed her eyes, her breath deep and calm. "This is enough for me," she whispered. "This silence. This company. This remembrance." But far off, just beyond the horizon, a silhouette appeared, small at first, like a speck of dust, but growing steadily larger. Hazrat Musa, A.S., stood, his gaze fixed upon the figure approaching through the shimmering heat. The old woman followed his eyes, shielding hers from the sun, and for a moment, her breath caught. The figure now had a face, a stride, a familiar lean to his shoulders. Harun walked with increasing speed, his heart pounding louder than the gravel crunching beneath his sandals. His eyes scanned the landscape, locking onto the tree he remembered, the crooked stone nearby, and then, he saw her. His steps faltered, his knees weakened, and tears welled up before he could even speak. The old woman stood, trembling. Her lips parted, but no words came. Her eyes searched his face, older, yes, weathered, but still her boy. "Amma," he said, his voice barely more than a whisper. She stumbled toward him, arms outstretched. When they met, the years melted like snow beneath spring rain. He fell to his knees, embracing her legs, and she wept into his hair, rocking him gently like she used to when he was small. Hazrat Musa, A.S., turned his face away, the intimacy of the moment too sacred to intrude upon. He looked toward the sky and whispered, "Ya Allah, your mercy is wide, your wisdom perfect." The reunion lasted for long moments, neither of them caring that the desert was harsh or that time had been cruel. In that embrace, decades of silence were answered. The old woman cradled his face. "I thought you forgot me." "Never, Amma," he replied, choking on his tears. "I thought of you every night. But I told myself, tomorrow. And then tomorrow became years." She smiled with forgiveness. "Allah did not forget. He returned you to me." Hazrat Musa, A.S., eventually stepped forward, placing a hand on Harun's shoulder. "You have come because your mother's tears reached the throne of the Most High." Harun looked at the Prophet with awe. "You are Musa, the messenger of Allah." "I am only his servant," Musa, A.S., replied gently. They sat together then, Prophet, mother and son, under the tree, where the breeze now felt cooler, almost as though it carried the scent of paradise itself. Harun told her everything, how he had left with dreams of success, how he had struggled and survived, always thinking of returning but never finding the right time. She told him she never stopped praying. Hazrat Musa, A.S., watched the two of them, the weight of their love wrapping around the air like incense. But deep in his heart, he knew this moment was not only about reunion, it was a sign, a symbol for all who would come after. That no act of kindness goes unseen. That no prayer is forgotten. That no heart which seeks Allah's mercy is left empty. Later that evening, as the sky turned orange and gold, Hazrat Musa, A.S., prepared to continue his journey. He stood and gave one last look to the pair who now sat side by side, the old woman leaning her head gently on her son's shoulder, as though resting for the first time in decades. Before departing, Musa, A.S., took a step toward Harun. "Cherish her, for you have been given a gift that many are denied, a second chance." Harun nodded, his voice thick. "I will never leave her side again." And as the Prophet walked away, his figure blending into the desert's mystery, the old woman turned her face upward and whispered softly, "Ya Allah, my heart is full. Let this moment never fade." The stars began to emerge, twinkling softly like the eyes of angels watching from above, and in that quiet part of the world, where a mother had waited and a son had returned, the desert witnessed something even greater than a miracle. It saw love made whole again by the mercy of the most merciful. The night deepened over the desert, draping the land in a blanket of quiet and stars. The air had cooled, and the once blistering sand now held a soothing chill. Harun had gathered dry wood from the nearby brush and built a small fire, its glow dancing against the faces of mother and son as they sat close, silently savoring the warmth of reunion. His mother, wrapped in a worn shawl, leaned back against the trunk of the tree, her eyes occasionally drifting toward the heavens. The embers reflected in her gaze, but beyond them shimmered something deeper. Peace, perhaps, or a kind of sacred exhaustion that only comes when a heart has been given more than it hoped for. Harun, sitting cross-legged beside her, held her hand gently in his, as if afraid that letting go might somehow send her back into the shadows of the years he had lost. "I brought you something," he said after a long while, his voice low, almost shy. He reached into his bundle and drew out a small, finely woven scarf. It wasn't extravagant, just a simple piece of cloth dyed in soft blues, but it was clean, new, and folded with care. He held it out to her. She took it slowly, running her fingers across the fabric, her lips trembling. "You remembered the color," she whispered. "You used to wear blue when I was a boy," he said. "I always thought it made you look like the sky after rain." She smiled, her voice barely above the crackle of the fire. "You were always saying strange things like that. I thought you were dreaming too much." "I was," he said, laughing softly. "But tonight, I feel like I've finally woken up." They fell into silence again, but it was the kind of silence that breathes. A stillness not of emptiness but of fullness, where nothing more needed to be said. The fire crackled, the stars drifted overhead, and the wind carried the faint scent of night flowers blooming somewhere unseen. From a short distance, a pair of jackals howled, their cries echoing across the valley. Harun reached for a long stick and fed another piece of wood into the flames. "Amma," he said slowly, "did you ever lose hope?" She didn't answer right away. She looked into the fire, her eyes tracing the embers as if they held the answers to questions too heavy for speech. "Once," she said at last. "There was one night, not long ago. It was bitterly cold. I had no food, not even water. My fingers were so numb I could barely light the lamp. I remember looking at the door, just staring, thinking, he is not coming. He will never come." Harun looked down, grief seizing his chest. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I should have come sooner." "No," she said, squeezing his hand. "That night, I nearly gave up. But then I remembered your smile. The way you used to run barefoot through the fields. The way you'd bring me wildflowers you couldn't even name. And I thought, no, Allah is not so cruel as to give me such a child only to take him away forever. I held on to that. I held on to you. He wiped his face with his sleeve, tears spilling freely now. I thought I was chasing a better life, but I forgot what made life better in the first place. She shook her head. You came back. That is what matters. Allah brings back what is lost, sometimes not in the way we expect, but always in the way we need. The fire crackled again, louder this time, throwing sparks into the dark like tiny stars returning to the sky. Harun added another piece of wood, then glanced around. You live so far from the city. Isn't it dangerous? She shrugged. The creatures of the wild have more mercy than men with hardened hearts. Besides, I had the trees, the stars, and my prayers. They kept me company. He looked around at her modest dwelling, barely a shelter, with a few pots and a thin mat inside. He thought of his home in the city, with walls and servants, with mirrors and soft bedding, and none of it felt as sacred as this patch of sand under a tree beside his mother. I will take you with me, he said suddenly. We'll go back together. I'll build you a home. A real one. With warm food and silk blankets. You won't have to lift a finger again. She smiled again, but it was a sad smile, full of quiet understanding. You think I am waiting for a house? He blinked. But why not? You've lived like this for years. You deserve. I deserve what Allah gives me, she said gently. And what he gave me tonight is worth more than any house. I don't want walls around me. I want the sky. I want your voice waking me in the morning. I want to sit under this tree and tell you stories like I did when you were small. Harun swallowed hard. So, you want me to stay? I want you to be where your soul breathes, she said. And tonight, I think it is breathing again. The words settled into his heart like seeds into fertile ground. He looked up at the stars, remembering nights when he used to lie in this same spot as a boy, dreaming of distant lands and great adventures. But now, older, wiser, he saw that the greatest journey was not across mountains or oceans, it was the road that led back to her. He leaned against her shoulder, just as he had done when he was a child. Her fingers combed through his hair, slow and steady, as the night deepened and the stars wheeled quietly above them. Somewhere in the distance, the first light of far began to stir behind the mountains, casting a soft gray glow across the desert. A new day was being born, and with it, a new beginning, not just for Harun, but for the story written in the folds of every tear, every prayer, every moment endured in faith. And in that tender hour, under the whispering sky, a mother and her son sat together by the fire, wrapped not just in warmth, but in something eternal. As the soft hues of dawn spread across the desert, brushing the horizon with gold and rose, the stillness around the tree seemed to shimmer with unseen grace. Harun stirred from his light sleep, his head resting gently on his mother's lap, as though the years had turned backward and made him a child again. The embers of the fire still glowed, and his mother's hands continued to move slowly through his hair, her touch timeless, her presence luminous. The silence of that moment was not empty, it was alive. Every grain of sand seemed to whisper the same divine truth, that Allah does not forget. That love built on sacrifice and prayers can survive the harshest winters of separation. That even in the deepest loneliness, someone is being guided back, step by step, by the unseen hand of the most merciful. Hazrat Musa, A.S., though no longer in sight, had left something behind. Not a command, not a miracle to behold, but a bridge. A sacred bridge of understanding, forged by faith and longing, between a mother's patience and a son's return. And now, with the sun ascending slowly behind them, Harun understood. His journey had never been toward wealth. It had been toward this very moment. He sat up, his heart still wrapped in the softness of her presence, and turned to face her. Amma, he said gently, how did you bear it all? The years, the silence, the waiting. She looked at him, her eyes crinkling as they reflected the pale gold of the morning light. When you are a mother, she said, your heart stretches beyond your own body. It lives in your children. When they laugh, you taste joy. When they cry, you bleed inside. So when you left, I lived half a life. But I held onto the half that prayed. Tears returned to Harun's eyes, unashamed. He took her hand and kissed it, the skin thin and wrinkled, yet more precious to him now than all the silks and silver he had chased. I never deserved your prayers, he said. No one earns a mother's prayer, she replied, smiling. It is given, freely, endlessly, because it does not come from merit. It comes from love. Just then, a soft breeze moved through the desert, lifting the ends of her shawl and stirring the dust at their feet. It carried with it the scent of newness, a kind of sacred fragrance that could not be named, only felt. The sky above them was wide and pure, the kind of sky beneath which destinies are rewritten. Harun looked up. He thought of the years wasted, the moments missed. But rather than feel regret, something else took root inside him, resolve. A promise not made with loud vows, but with the quiet strength of conviction. He would not lose her again. He would not chase the world while the soul of his world sat waiting under a tree. I will stay here with you, Amma, he said softly. I will build us a place. Not of bricks and marble, but of love, of prayer, of remembrance. She placed her hand on his chest. Then we shall have more than any palace. And so the days passed, each one wrapped in light and mercy. Harun built a modest home beside the old tree. Every stone he lifted was laid with intention, every wall raised with gratitude. The city behind him faded like a dream, and the desert around him became alive with meaning. Travelers would pass by and be welcomed with kindness. They would sit under the tree and listen to stories from an old woman whose words carried the fragrance of divine nearness. But what they never fully understood, what they could only feel in the hush of her presence, was that this place was more than a shelter. It was a testament. A living proof that when Allah writes a story, it is not hurried. It unfolds with purpose, with beauty, with a wisdom that defies all earthly logic. The tale of Hazrat Musa, A.S., and the old woman spread across villages and lands. It was told in homes and mosques, repeated in quiet gatherings and remembered during moments of sorrow. Not because it was dramatic, but because it touched something sacred in every heart, the longing for return, the power of patience, the miracle of prayers. And perhaps, most of all, because it reminded people of something many forget, that in the silence of waiting, in the pain of distance, in the cracks of despair, Allah is not absent. He is crafting. He is bringing hearts closer. He is preparing the moment where all things fall into place, not just in this world, but in the eternal pages of His mercy. One evening, years later, as the sun dipped behind the horizon in a blaze of orange and crimson, Harun sat beside his mother once more. Her hair had turned silver, and her voice had grown soft, but her spirit was still aflame. She leaned against him and whispered, "You came back." He kissed her forehead. "You called me with your tears." She smiled, her eyes shining like the last stars of night before far. "No, my son, it was not my tears. It was your Lord who answered them." And with those words, she closed her eyes, her breath light, her face at peace. In that sacred moment, she returned to the one she had always trusted. Harun wept, not in agony, but in awe. For he had witnessed the final chapter of a life written in prayer, sealed with reunion, and delivered with grace. The stars rose once again, watching from above, as if to bear witness. The wind sang softly through the trees. And beneath them, where a mother had once waited, and a son had once returned, now stood a story, eternal, magnificent, and alive in every heart that still believes in the mercy of the Most High.